alarm anew over the spike in infections in some parts of Metro Manila.
What we do suggest is that we all take this rise in cases all around the NCR seriously. We need to adjust our behavior. Government needs to adjust its strategy and intensify testing, tracing, isolation. It needs to intensify or it needs to accelerate.
The Philippines is set to receive more COVID-19 vaccines on Thursday, this time from AstraZeneca through the COVAX facility.
The OCTA research team warns that the South African variant will lessen the efficacy of AstraZeneca vaccines.
In terms of the long-term goal, you might want to pick Sinovac over AstraZeneca because even though the efficacy for Sinovac is a little bit lower than AstraZeneca, it will protect you against the B.1.351 while AstraZeneca will not.
As more vaccines are expected to arrive in the country, the government is struggling to contain the increase of cases of the COVID-19 South African variant. Will a faster vaccine rollout be able to contain new infections?
Meanwhile, the Philippine Constitution states that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall be presumed innocent until proven guilty. But a proposed bill amending the anti-drug law, critics say, already presumes the guilt of drug suspects upon their arrest. Thus, House Bill 7814 violate the Constitution. We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs.
Welcome to this midweek edition of The Chiefs. With us, of course, in the studio is Robbie Lampay of One News. And joining us online, Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Head of News 5, Lucy Cruz Valdez from Quezon City. Happy midweek! It's a Wednesday, dalawang araw na lang. Biyernes na. Okay, at isang tulog na lang, may parating na raw na bagong bakuna.
AstraZeneca na.
AstraZeneca. But that was one of our big stories now because now they're scrutinizing yung efficacy ng AstraZeneca dito rin sa bagong variant din na binabati natin, South African variant. Kasi it looks like bumagsak yung efficacy ng AstraZeneca in particular dito, particularly sa South African variant.
Okay, let's bring in our guest tonight kasi mukhang marami-rami tayong pag-uusapan ngayon. Nakapag-segue na naman si Robbie. Okay.
Tsaka gusto natin pag-usapan kaagad eh.
Sige, gina tayo. Sige, our first guest for tonight are, of course, our favorites from the OCTA Research Group, Professor Guido David and Father Nick Austriaco. Father Nick, I think, is coming in from the U.S.
I am. Good morning from the United States.
Good morning, Father Nick and Professor Guido.
Inulitin ko lang yung sinabi ni Ed, exactly as he phrases. You are our favorites sa OCTA Research. That's what he said.
I mean,
our favorites at OCTA Research.
Out of context yun. Father, let me start off with this. Prof, let me start off with this. Particularly, Father, you've been quoted as saying, we have a new batch of vaccines arriving tomorrow, the AstraZeneca vaccines, I think around 500,000. But you've also been quoted as saying that the AstraZeneca vaccines would be ineffective if we don't get under control yung South African variant that is now, that has gained a foothold in the Philippines. Is there anything that we need to qualify in this statement in terms of what kinds of infections or severity we are looking at and by how much?
So the study that I was citing, which was published on medRxiv last month, is a study of about 2,000 individuals in South Africa. And with the B.1.351, what they found is that the efficacy against mild and moderate COVID-19 dropped from the 70% that is expected for that vaccine to 10%. And in fact, what happened in South Africa is after this data was published, South Africa donated all of its AstraZeneca vaccine doses to the African Union and replaced the AstraZeneca with Johnson & Johnson. Now, in the Philippines, we are not in that position because at this time, my hope and my prayer is that Pasay will be able to contain the South African variant. I understand from the news that there are 77 barangays in lockdown in that city.
In Pasay.
So hopefully for 14 days. So I'm hoping that we will be able to contain, eliminate, and actually starve that virus to death.
Father, if I may just zero in on one particular detail that you brought up, or is related to something that you brought up. But you said, if I heard you right, the drop in 10%, that pertains specifically to mild to moderate symptoms. What about severe symptoms?
That was not tested.
I see.
Okay.
So that was not tested in the 2,000 volunteers who were part of that clinical trial, which is why the World Health Organization, even in spite of this, is hoping that the AstraZeneca will be protective against severe disease against B.1.351. There is no data for or against this, which is why South Africa decided to give up all its AstraZeneca doses.
Father, singit ko lang po, para lang ma-qualify natin. So, mild to moderate po itong 10% ng AstraZeneca. Just to qualify further po, kasi medyo nakakalito yung mga yan, mga qualifiers yan eh. Mild to moderate means what? Versus severe meaning what?
So severe usually implies hospitalization. So non-hospitalized COVID-19 is often referred to as mild or moderate. So mild, if you don't go to the hospital. Moderate, usually you may have to go to the hospital to visit a doctor, but you do not get hospitalized.
Outpatient.
And then severe and critical is you're in the hospital and you're the ICU.
There also another clarification. Is there a difference between the AstraZeneca developed in the UK and the one developed in South Korea, which is the one we are getting? In the list of the World Health Organization, there are two types of AstraZeneca that applied for emergency use license, and the one that got it was the one developed by South Korea. So is there a difference? Which one was tested? Would you know which one was tested in
South Africa. So there is one formulation of AstraZeneca. It's the AstraZeneca that passed the phase 3 clinical trials. But there are different manufacturing plants all over the world that are making the same formulation. So whether or not the drug was made in South Africa, in South Korea or in India or in Belgium, the idea is that these are the same formulation of the drug.
Okay.
So what's the conclusion again? Just to be clear about it, no, para rin maintindihan ng mga viewers. So are the tests now showing, at least in South Africa, the 2,000 that you're referring to, are they showing AstraZeneca is not as efficacious against the South African variant?
So yes, I think we can conclude from that study that the AstraZeneca is ineffective, and ineffective is defined as less than 50% efficacy.
Okay.
So because the efficacy was pegged at 10%, we will say it's ineffective against mild and moderate cases of COVID-19.
But we don't have data
So
on
that's
severe,
way
no?
below the 50%
50% is
standard that the
standard.
WHO has set, right?
That's correct.
So what does that make of the fact that AstraZeneca vaccines will be arriving tomorrow, almost 500,000 of them, and that we're now finding South African variant here? Are we gonna say now that we will probably not use it in NCR, or it's too early to tell?
I think it is too premature to conclude that. Any percentage of protection is better than 0%. And so when people ask me, if you should receive a vaccination, whichever vaccine is offered to you, because we do not know at this time what will happen in a few weeks with regards to a B.1.351. AstraZeneca is also producing a new version of its vaccine, So in the future, if 351 begins to spread, then what we will have to do is we will have to give booster shots to the ones who receive it in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that we should not discard those vaccines now. We should distribute them, especially to our healthcare workers, frontliners. And if we find in a few months that the 351 is spreading, then the government must look for a booster shot from AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca has announced it is making these booster shots. And we will have to get additional doses for them to be revaccinated later this year.
I think, Father, that's a very important qualifier kasi most people would just read what you were quoted as saying earlier na ineffective siya and conclude that it shouldn't be used on people. But once you qualify it,
Yes.
it does sound like you're saying that we should take it because any percentage of effectivity is better than none.
Yes, I mean, yes, I think that's just reasonable. What we do not know the future, so we want to be protected however much we are protected.
Right,
And, if there's the 351, we will deal with that in a few months when that becomes dominant.
Okay.
okay, Father.
Now-
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
we-
Do you think then, would you recommend then that, I mean, I know that this sounds too hard and fast, but is it safe to say, for example, at this point, that you might be better off taking Sinovac?
Well, you cannot choose when you only have one choice. Even here in the US, I was not given a choice for the vaccine I received. So my suggestion is when the vaccine, whichever vaccine is offered to you, it is best to simply receive it at this time and we will worry about other things later. We raised the concern yesterday during or earlier today at our press briefing only because it is, if we do not control the 351, it will be a game changer. And our primary point in raising those concerns is to emphasize to the government how important it is to contain 351, especially since there is talk of moving everything to MGCQ, and we understand why this is important to reopen the economy, but we have to be very careful to make sure that 351 does not spread beyond Pasay as it is now.
Okay, Father, I'll seize on that to bring in Professor Guido David. Professor, how do we know? How do we know if we are being able to keep a lid on this particular variant? And for that matter, is it too early to say, or does the data already bear out what's happening with this virus in Pasay and for that matter elsewhere in the country?
Well, Robbie, the sad part is we will not know for sure because we will not have enough genome sequencing. So we have limitations in our biosurveillance. And that's the truth. So if we don't know how many of this variant or cases with a variant are around in Metro Manila, I mean, well, we can guess what the percentage is. And perhaps if we do periodic biosurveillance, we can see if this percentage is growing. But we don't think it's widespread. I mean, that widespread yet. I mean, what we mean is it's probably a percentage of the cases in Metro Manila, but there will still be the ancestral variant, being infected around. But we do have a feeling that, or a supposition that the variant is also driving the transmissions in Metro Manila. But we don't know if it's the South African. Maybe part of it is actually the UK variant. But the end result is we don't know yet at this time.
Yeah, but we asked because, I mean, yesterday we were speaking with Pasay Mayor Calixto Rubiano, and she did say that precisely what you said. Particularly when we go to genome sequencing, it takes a longer time than the standard test. If I remember correctly, she said about
Half a
15
month, 15
days,
days.
something like that, no?
15 days.
So
By
that's
which
quite
time
a
we
lag
don't
time.
know where the contagion will have gone. But we also note that months ago, you did a pretty good job in telling everybody ahead of the data, ahead of the actual results, that just looking at the trends, we suspect that B.1.1.7 is already here. Is there something in the data and in the behavior of the South African variant that is going to be a signature for you to say that, that looks like that does not look like B.1.1.7 or the older variants?
Well, Robbie, maybe the closest signature that we could identify is that we calculated the reproduction number in Pasay, and it was greater than 2. It was about
wow.
2.25.
Wow.
That's a very high
Yeah.
reproduction number, as I'm sure you're familiar with. I mean, even Cebu City had it up to 1.8 before they started controlling the spread. And the 1.8 was most likely due to the B.1.1.7 or the UK variant. But this one is faster. But so far, we're seeing that speed only in Pasay. We haven't seen it. Well, it's spilling over to some of the other LGUs in Metro Manila. But so far, the speed in the other LGUs is not yet that fast. But we have some, there are some spots where we think that it might be, they might have the, possibly the South African variant, and that might include parts of Makati and maybe Manila that are close to Pasay. Right now, we're also seeing another surge in the northern NCR, but this is mostly clustering type of surge. I mean, this is happening in Malabon and Navotas. This is also surge, but it's possible that this is being driven by a different kind of variant, or maybe just the ancestral version, although we kind of doubt it, because what we're saying is that the residents of Metro Manila have learned to adapt to the coronavirus in a way, because we haven't seen a surge in several months. And the fact that the surge is happening now means that there is something more that's driving this surge, and part of it could be the variant. So, but we're not sure if most of it is just the UK variant or the South African variant, or maybe a mixture of both.
Ironically, the mayor says that she feels that they should be ready to loosen restrictions in 2 weeks. To just give them another 2 weeks. No? Advisable ba yun?
Well, we'll see what the numbers say. Right now, in Metro Manila, we're averaging about 900 cases per day over the past 5 days, I think. And compared to 2 weeks ago, it was only 400. So that's more than 100% increase from 2 weeks ago. So if the cases start to subside, then perhaps we can be more liberal in loosening restrictions. But if the cases continue to rise, then we have to reconsider these decisions.
Father Nick, you had a Moderna shot. Have you had your second dose, and how are you feeling? Do you feel protected against all these variants? How are you feeling now?
Well, it was surprisingly freeing to know that I basically 10 days from now I will have 95% protection because I received the Moderna. I do have to say, and I want to emphasize this because I think it's surprising to people. After our second dose, so there were 40 Dominican priests who received the second dose last Friday. 20 of us were very sick on Saturday, me included. So the day after the second dose is particularly rough. So the whole
Very
day,
sick, meaning what were you?
headache, body ache, every bone in your body was painful. You had fever, you had chills, you were shaking in your bed for about 24 hours, and then it was gone.
Father, alam naman natin yan, di ba? Pagka binabakunahan, even sa old bakuna, you're constantly telling baka magkasinat ka. But for this particular, I mean, everybody's anxieties are heightened. How do we know if I should panic or not? I mean, if I get a shot and then I get these really severe body aches and so on, how do I know if this is just par for the course or if it's something that something may have gone wrong?
Well, basically, I mean, you feel like you have a bad flu. So, and once you have, we took paracetamol, and after you take two paracetamols, it actually subsides.
Okay.
And since we were warned of this, everyone said, the younger you are, the more reactive your body is. So all the Lolopris had no effect at all. No effect. But if you are 55 years or younger, and the younger you were, the more difficult it was.
Oh,
so
really?
in terms of feeling bad, you will feel like you have a flu for
Okay.
about 24 hours.
But the
Now,
good
if
news
you're
is,
having
but
problems breathing,
Ah.
if you are, so if there are some basic functions that are curtailed, that are not like a flu, then you have to go to the ER. But
Yeah.
there has been nothing like that so far.
But I
We
guess
just felt very sad for one day.
yeah, but I guess, Father, another way of looking at it is the good news is yung wisdom na sinasabi sa atin ng matatanda, ng parents natin dati na pagka sininat ka, ibig sabihin lumalaban yung katawan mo. That will hold true and it's the same message.
Exactly. And one of the things we are discovering here in the US is that if you had an asymptomatic COVID you did not know, the first dose will be harder than the second dose because the COVID will be the first dose. So actually, so some of the young kids, the first dose was difficult. And what that confirmed that they had COVID even though they never tested
They
positive.
Ah, ganun. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's...
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting.
So
Okay.
you see,
So,
we are learning
yeah.
things, and for them, the second dose, walang problema, but the first dose was difficult. And so we have to tell the people this, because if they feel terrible, they will think I'm dying. No, you're not dying. This is actually your body reacting. You will be well in one day. And it was one day, and it was all gone. It's like nothing happened.
Father, I know you said kanina na in the end, we don't really have a choice naman eh. What is there, whatever brand is there, we should use. But before we went on air, I had the impression that meron kayong recommendations as to how to deploy or which brands to deploy where, considering the strengths and weaknesses of each brand that we would expect in the next few days.
Well, I think those discussions are still premature given we do not have enough information. But if we discover in a few months that the 351 is becoming predominant in the NCR, then it may be strategic for the national government to deploy the AstraZeneca vaccines to regions of the Philippines which have not been touched by the 351.
Okay.
And then concentrate the other vaccines here in the NCR.
But are we sure that Sinovac works against the South African?
So there is evidence from Brazil that Sinovac is effective against the South African variant, even though that data has not formally been published yet. But the Brazilian equivalent of the FDA has described information, has provided information that it is still effective.
Father, I'm
What about
tempted to
the
ask...
Pfizer shot?
Sige, go ahead.
I'm
Bok.
sorry?
Go ahead.
Pfizer shot works.
So the Sinovac shot works. We do
No,
not
the
know
Pfizer,
exactly how
Pfizer.
much.
The Pfizer shot.
The Pfizer shot works, but the Pfizer and Moderna are decreased against the South African variant. So they will go from 95 to like 60% efficacy. So it's still effective because it's above 50%. But you can see the South African variant is called an escape variant. It can escape the immune response. So all the vaccines begin to drop. Some drop a lot more than others.
Does that have something to do with the RNA versus the spike protein that was used in Sinovac? May kinalaman ba yun doon?
So the difference actually, so the reason why Sinovac is effective, and we expect it to be effective, is because Sinovac, they inject the whole virus into you. And so the target for the immune system is bigger. So even if the variant changes one part, the other parts of the virus are still vulnerable. But
Yes.
for AstraZeneca, for Pfizer, Moderna, you only put in a small part. So if the small part changes, then the vaccine becomes ineffective.
Well, Father, what about your beer vaccine? I'm sorry, your
So,
yeast-based vaccine. Would it be effective against against any
so,
variants?
Wishful
so
thinking.
As of 2 days ago, we passed the first
Oh,
stage.
okay.
So we have the yeast now that is producing the spike protein. In fact, today my student and I will go and redesign we will have a new version also that is effective against the South African and the Brazilian version. So the Brazilian variant is not yet in the Philippines, but it is actually uh, it is also an immune escaping variant. So we have to prepare for that. So we are preparing for that as well.
Is that easy to do? You're designing your vaccine around these variants. I mean, is
Yeah.
that
So
Okay.
we will take us 30 minutes on a computer to redesign the gene, and then
wow?
we will order the gene. It will take about 4 weeks to make, and then we put it back into yeast. And so we will have two different versions of the vaccine, one for the ancestral version, and then the second one for the new variants.
Parang
Ang
designer
tawag
beer
doon,
lang, ah.
designer genes
Designer
ang tawag
beer.
dyan, Ed. But Professor David, we don't have much time anymore for this segment, but I did also want to ask, given dito sa South African variant na alam natin, the R naught, as you said, is higher, so this spreads faster. In the meantime, we know the dilemma from local governments and for government, we need to reopen. One mitigating factor for everyone, of course, as they said, hindi, localized lockdown tayo. But when you speak of localized lockdown, all of this, all of the protocols and mechanisms for a localized lockdown were based on the old variants. Is there anything else that maybe LGUs may have to consider, further strengthen, further hone when it comes to dealing with these new variants?
Well, I think, Robbie, it's still basically the same strategy. And I think localized lockdowns will work naman because it's the same principle that, as Father Nick is saying, that having the localized lockdown will essentially starve the virus because it will not be transferred to other hosts if we do not allow people to interact with other people that much, or they might just be interacting within their own small community, for example. So we do think that localized lockdowns work, but what we do think is that although they're doing it in Pasay, some of it has already escaped Pasay and leaked over to some other LGUs. For example, the nearby barangays in Manila, Makati, and Taguig, because we're seeing increasing numbers in Makati as well, and also in Taguig and in Parañaque. Although the rate of increase is not as fast yet as what we saw in Pasay. Regarding the other strategies in terms of the health protocols, it's still going to be the same, but I think we just have to apply them more strictly. Not take chances, maybe wear face masks. We don't really suggest wearing two face masks, but if some people would want to do that, then they can try it. But generally, we just have to be more strict because right now, part of the problem is we're also becoming more complacent. I mean, the citizens are becoming more complacent. And we can reopen the economy, but the people have to be reminded that we cannot be complacent, especially against this more infectious variant that we're seeing starting to spread in Metro Manila.
Okay.
Okay. We'd like to say thank you to our friends from OCTA Research, Father Guido, I'm sorry,
Thank you,
Professor
Father
Guido David
Nick.
and
Thank
Father
you,
Nick
Prof.
Austriaco.
Guido.
Thank you, sirs, Father and Professor, and ingat po kayo.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
We will just go into a break, so please stay with us.
Welcome back to Chiefs here on One News. We're now in the final stage of our conversation. Joining us to discuss House Bill 7814 is the author and House Committee and on Dangerous Drugs Chairman, Congressman Robert Ace Barbers, and Muntinlupa City Representative Rufy Biazon. Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening,
Thank you,
sir.
sirs.
Okay, so,
Evening.
we're talking about this House Bill 7814, which would amend the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act, because now critics are saying this could be unconstitutional. Some of the passage, we'll just read to it. Someone is presumed to have knowledge of or has willfully consented to legal importation, exportation of drugs and so on, or having used his or her influence of power or position. And, but then that presumption, and that's a key word that critics are really pouncing on, could be overturned upon presentation of proof that the importation is authorized or valid. Now, in a nutshell, people are saying, may problema kami sa presumption dito, no? Because there's presumption of innocence under our Constitution. I want to start with Congressman Biazon because, and correct us if I'm wrong, sir, but you filed the original version of this bill in 2019, and now you've withdrawn your authorship of this bill. Is there anything to qualify there? And if it's a fairly accurate narrative, what happened?
Well, it's true that I filed a bill proposing to amend RA 9165, and it's an advocacy that I share with Congressman Barbers. But in this particular case, after the bills have been consolidated, put together, blended together, and the final output that was presented to the plenary included some provisions that personally I have discomfort with. That's why I decided to vote against that version, because it's something that I believe in. The presumption of innocence until proven guilty.
Yeah, the insertions that you're mentioning, that pertain to the passage that we read, and that pertains precisely to what critics are saying would violate the Constitution, would violate the presumption of innocence?
Yes, those are the exact provisions that I find discomfort with. And actually, this is not the first time that I've taken such a stance on a bill that I had filed. Because it's really up to the final version that will be presented to the plenary.
You're referring to the anti-terror law, right?
Yes.
Yes. Now we withdraw mo rin precisely because you felt that the burden of proof was being shifted in effect to the accused in the end, right? That's the effect of it. In this case, I'd like to ask Congressman Ace Barbers, what would be the justification for presuming the guilt of someone who is found to be there when the bill of lading is in his hands, or there in the vicinity when a raid is undertaken, just because of mere presence, and in effect you're shifting the burden of proof to the accused rather than to the prosecution?
Okay, first of all, Luchi and Ami, and of course my colleague Congressman Biazon and Ed and everybody. Good evening. First of all, let me just state for the record that this presumption are legal, disputable presumptions. Meaning, you can dispute that, but there's a process for you to be able to dispute that. Number two, these are legal because there are jurisprudence that says that this is not constitutional. In fact, the Supreme Court in several cases decided that legal presumptions are okay, and these are being used in some of the prosecution being done in some of the criminal activities that were committed. Number three, it's not just the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court that allows the use of legal presumptions, because even our existing laws in the revised penal code allows as such legal presumptions to exist. Number one, yung presumption of malice in a case, in a libel case. If a statement is issued then therefore somebody feels it is libelous, there is already a presumption of malice. In the case of rebellion, in the revised penal code, it clearly states that a leader of rebellion can be presumed to have been the coup d'etat or whatever rebellion has been presumed to have been ordered by an official. So other than that, there are also existing presumptions in our old law, in the same law that we are trying to amend in Section 12 and Section 16, for instance, in the issue of cultivation, marijuana cultivation, assuming a 1 hectare of property that you own in Batangas suddenly has marijuana plantation in it, then the owner is presumed to have knowledge about the plantation. Do not tell me that even the owner does not know that there was a marijuana plantation growing in their own property.
Pero hindi ba parang prima facie lang muna yon?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it works,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You file a
Yeah.
case on the basis of that as prima facie evidence.
Yeah,
But beyond that,
yeah.
the burden of proof shifts to prosecution.
Not only that,
And-
Congressman, if I may also, add here, particularly when it comes to presumption of malice, when it comes to libel and defamation, that is specific to when it is applied to a private citizen. But when it comes to a public figure, for example, no, it's the other way around. The people are granted the presumption of innocence. The point here being that is still the general premise, hindi po ba? The general law of the land still is basically about presuming innocence. You can cite, any other jurisprudence or so on. But what we're talking about here is the basic principle of the Constitution to presume innocence, particularly when it comes to criminal complaints.
I absolutely agree with you, Robbie. I absolutely agree with you, Lucci, because in this case, in this particular proposal, the constitutional guarantee of presumption to innocence is respected and is maybe undisturbed. No one has touched that presumption. Going back again to the prima facie thing, yung presumption that you are a criminal offender does not mean or does not necessarily mean or tantamount to you being presumed guilty.
Congressman,
Yes, sir, but that shifts the burden on you. Yes, sir. But yes, sir.
Presumptions that in any proceedings, as long as you can provide evidence contrary to the presumption being put forward in the prosecution, then if the court finds out, kasi remember, process dito, it's at the end of the day, it's still the court that will determine whether the defense or the prosecution has given enough evidence, has given their testimonies. They will determine who has the guilt, who is dismissed. At saka walang ano rito, walang shifting of burden of proof. Let me clear this. The burden of proof will remain with the prosecution or the state. Because it is up to the state or the prosecutors that you are indeed, for instance, a cuddler or an importer of drugs.
But it says here, presumption may be...
It's the burden of evidence.
Yeah,
There's a distinction between burden of proof at saka burden of evidence. Malayo po yun.
Yeah, I was gonna lead to that nga. Anong difference nun? I mean,
Obviously,
burden of evidence, burden of proof. But isn't evidence proof?
yeah, Lucci, kasi when the prosecutor will file a case against you, of course, you will definitely, the accused will have your own defense. Diba? So, yung evidence mo will only be believed by the court if the weight of the evidence you presented is much heavier than the weight of the prosecutor. So, yung burden of evidence of disproving what the prosecutor says is in the accused. It never shifted. There was never a shift of burden of proof from the accuser, which is the state or the prosecutor, to the accused. So again, protected pa rin dito yung presumption of innocence. Remember, just a presumption is not a presumption of guilt. It is just a presumption that needs to be proven in the court.
Pero sir,
Congressman, meron man tayong mga batas na ganyan talaga and jurisprudence. Ang pinoproblema dito sa bill, parang dinagdagan nyo. Yung nagkaroon ng mga, even the protectors, eto unless proven otherwise, a
That's
person
right.
will shield, arbor screens, saka pati yung mga kamag-anak ng
That's right.
It's
It's guilt.
the way,
I'm glad you
considering
raised
the
that.
way that the drug war has been carried out, natatakot ngayon ng mga tao na madadagdagan yung mga reasons for abuse, especially since our Justice Secretary himself has admitted that there were lapses, there were abuses.
In more than 50%.
Yan ang inaalala ngayon, dyan sa House Bill na yan, yung version na yan. So ano yung nasasabi niyo? Don't you share those concerns? Kasi parang nadadagdagan yung mga excuses to
Arrest.
To
To be reckless.
To carry out extrajudicial operations.
Yung
Yun lang naman yung concern na madadagdagan ng excuses to go above the law actually.
No, there's nothing like that in this proposal. I'm sorry, with all due respect. Kasi dito, ang very important element dito is there should be an arrest before a presumption will take place. Assuming, I arrested you for having in your possession, say, 100 grams of shabu. Now, under this law, no, if you're caught in your possession, 100 grams of shabu in your pocket, hindi lang possession ang itakaso sa'yo. You will also
Yung problema doon yung protector yung protector and the customer. Yun ang problema doon.
Okay,
Yung protector
now
and the
ito yung
customer.
protector and I'm just laying the predicate kasi nga yung example po natin yung presumption. Now, if you want the example of the financial or the cuddler and protector, ganito yan Hinuli si Pedro. No? Tumawag si General X. Sabi niya dun sa humuli, "Oy, Mr. Pidea, pakawalan mo si Pedro. Tao ko yan Okay. Now, in this case, there was intercession. The general interceded in behalf of the accused, di ba?
Talaga naman illegal na yun, di ba?
What do you now? No, hindi pa. In this particular, wala That's why maluwag itong 9165 Maluwag itong
Talaga namang
does not run after the big personalities behind the drug syndicate. It only runs after the ordinary street peddlers. That's why people are complaining.
Yes, but Congressman,
mga maliliit lang na mga project.
but Congressman, I'll go back to...
Nasaan yung mga narco generals? Nasaan yung mga narco judges? Nasaan yung mga
Yes, but
narco
Congressman, thank you for...
politicians, di ba? Yes, Rob.
Congressman, thank you for raising those questions. Asan yung mga generals? Asan yung mga big-time, This is the same questions that people have been asking for so many years. And given the power, and not only the power, but the political will of this administration in particular. I mean, let's all be honest. Under President Duterte, the full weight of the law has really been used in this war on drugs, di ba? And we will even presume the legality of all of these things. But if there's anybody who has proven that if you implement the law na talagang siga-siga, it's President Duterte. And yet people are asking, asan yung mga big time? Asan yung mga And to Ami's point, every time a new bill is proposed, it is basically as if you are giving the police more leeway to be more reckless, to be more messy in their operations. And people are concerned that once this is implemented, we'll go back to the same question, that it's going to be guilt by association, it's going to be the same people that are low-hanging for the police, and so on. And part of that, sir, is, I may also add, you say, ano ba naman yan, ma-aresto, you'll have time to prove your innocence. But everybody knows in this country, ma-aresto ka, hindi mo alam kung kailan ka malang makakita ng abogado, particularly if you're a small-time and we go back to the point of, the Department of Justice, that more than, we're talking about here, sir.
Maybe we should hear from Congressman Rufy.
Yes.
Congressman Rufy, please go ahead.
Yes, okay. Let me just point out one provision in the bill. It says, unless proven otherwise, any person found or is present within the immediate vicinity of the area of the sale, trade, marketing, dispensation, delivery, or distribution is presumed to have been involved in the sale. So just by mere presence, it is presumed that you are involved.
Exactly.
So to me, just one provision in the entire bill that gives discomfort, that's enough for me to vote against it. And this is one.
No. Let me just clear that. No, ito yung ano like, there was, this really happened, no? There's an officer of the armed forces caught inside, no, a clandestine shabu laboratory. Okay. Now, suddenly, the PDEA came and raided the place. Now, what is the defense of that military officer? He said, no, I'm doing a surveillance and I'm trying to make an arrest.
Ba't sila naniwala?
Exactly. Kaya nga hindi natin nakasuhan. Yun ang ano. How do we now go? How do we now run after all these big time people behind this drug syndicate? So look, let's not. You have to look at it in a way that the presumptions here does not mean guilt.
Yes.
Okay.
Or to use the word
but sir,
of
even if we were
Rufy, involved, you're saying that involved, the word involved does not mean guilty. Yun ang sinasabi nyo. But involved kasi, actually, well, I know it's semantics, but involved actually means you're part of it. You're part of it. And we all know
you have to read the whole paragraph. Presume to have been
Congressman, I'll take you up on that. No,
Just read the phrase. There has, look at it this way. Again, I will state for the record that legal presumptions does not presume the guilt.
yes, and Congressman, I think we all share that hope. And in fact, there are examples, as you said, that people were arrested, were presumed to be guilty, and then years later were proven innocent. Diba? And I will agree with you. Presumption does not necessarily mean guilt. But in this country, sa bagal ng justice system natin, and where the Department of Justice says 50% of police operations against drugs in the past 4 years had irregularities, were questionable, where police did not do their jobs properly, and so on, presumption may not mean guilt, but presumption means suffering. Presumption means deprivation of liberty, and in many cases, deprivation of life.
Yeah, Robbie, you're correct. I absolutely agree with you, 1,001%. Pero iba ho yung pinag-uusapan natin. Pinag-uusapan natin dito yung provisions ng ating pinopropose na panukalang batas. And that is what we're trying to discuss here. But yes, there are abuses. Yes, there are excesses committed by law enforcers. But there's another law that takes care of that. If we're talking about the whole justice system, this does not specifically it's not related in this particular ano. Now, I agree with you, Robbie, when you say that there are law enforcers who plant evidence. There are prosecutors, judges, or policemen who actually bungle the case so that makawala yung mga kaibigan nila. Probably, pinoprotekta nila. And that is exactly what we addressed in this particular 7814. Because in Section 29, planting of evidence is likewise presumed against a police or a law enforcer. If the defense of the accused is suddenly, hindi akin yung drugs na yan. It was just planted by TO1 Pedro. So, there is now a presumption. So now, the court, the prosecutors will now have to prove this. Yung
siguro, sir,
all you need is probable cause. The determination of probable cause is the only thing the prosecutors need so that the case can be filed against.
Ang hirap kasi kung sa karanasan nating lahat ngayon, no, with the drug war, ang nakikita natin na kahinaan ay hindi sa pag-aaresto or sa panghuli. In fact, masyadong maraming pagkakamali or sabihin na lang natin abuses na nagaganap sa area ng pag-aresto. Parang mas mabilis mag-arrest kesa mag-resolve ng kaso. So ang pakiramdam nga namin, itong batas na to, pinapadali na naman yung pillar na yon na napakahina nga na hala sige kung manghuli ng mga drug abusers, drug pushers, ang bilis-bilis, pero ang mga kaso inaabot ng siyam-siyam at wala pang nangyayari. So I guess the question is, why can't we come up with resolutions that actually intend to speed up, diba, the judicial process instead of making it easy for the law enforcers on the ground to make arrests.
Again, like what I told Robbie, I absolutely agree with you. Lahat ng sinabi mo tama. Again, no, yung sa atin, I'm just proposing, what we are proposing is a law that will run after the drug lords. Now, yung delivery, yung the pillars of our justice system, that's another topic.
But Congressman, I think we all agree that we have to run after the drug lords. I think the question of everybody here is, in running after the drug lords, do we also have to step on basic rights? Kasi in very layman's terms, sir, unless proven otherwise, why do I have to prove otherwise if I'm accused? It boils down to that. Why do I have to prove otherwise when I'm not accused?
Because you're being accused.
Shouldn't the accuser...
Because you are being accused, that's why you have to prove otherwise.
Pero sir, doesn't that fly against against Article 3, Section 14 of the Constitution? It says there, it's very specific there. It's very specific there. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall be presumed innocent until the contrary is proved. It is not unless you prove otherwise.
If I may,
Otherwise, that answers your question, Ed.
Example,
Congressman Rufy, yeah.
Going back to that provision that I cited, mere presence, like for example, nasa isang fast food kayo, kumakain ka dun, and then a drug bust happened, you're present there. How can you now disprove na hindi ka kasama kung by just your mere presence, you would get involved? You're considered involved.
And quite simply, why would I have to prove?
The whole world of hurt will come down on you dahil
I'm glad you raised that point, Congressman Biason, because if you're in a restaurant and there was you having a transaction with someone, suddenly the PDEA comes and raids the place because they have an intel report. Intelligence gathering pa rin ito eh. Because they cannot just barge into a restaurant and arrest everybody there for the mere reason that everybody could probably be involved in the drug transaction. Siyempre, ikaw yung tatargetin. And sino pa yung pwedeng targetin? Ikaw, yung kausap mo, and those that could have been probably within effective, active management and control. What do I mean by that? Normally, you don't see the drug lords doing the transactions, correct? They send people. Assuming they can't, Congressman Biaso, to speak with Muhammad, a certain Pedro. Diba? The drug lord would just probably be outside of the premises of the restaurant or maybe inside the restaurant in a distant location that he can see the transaction. Hinuli natin yung alalay ng drug lord eh. How are we now going to run after the drug lord? Seated maybe a few meters away.
So how do you run after him with this law?
That's the reason why. In this law, you can presume that those people within effective, active control and management of the place na could be a suspect. Now, hindi naman ibig sabihin yun, may katabi kang table, hinuli ka rin. Di ba? Hindi. Siyempre may intelligence yung ideya eh. May intelligence yung...
Pero kung, di ba, unless proven otherwise...
That's the problem. The word of the provision says any person found or is present within the vicinity. It's as simple as that. Any person found.
And not only that, I'll go back to the logic of your point, sir. I mean, you're absolutely right. The mastermind will not be there.
No, they're referring to a place where perhaps a den, dive, or resort, a place that they're being used for, say, drug dealings or illegal drug transactions. Hindi yun. You don't interpret it that way. You don't interpret it that way.
Pero
Because
dumadami yung suspect,
But-
di ba? Dumadami, pati yung resort owner. Eh sa problema natin ngayon, basta mag-suspect ka lang, pwede ka mapatay eh.
Exactly.
Di ba? Yan yung pinakamalaking
Eh,
concern.
and-
ha?
ako ka dyan, Ami, ibang usapan.
Sabay ka
Eh,
agad,
yeah.
aresto lang.
Suspect
eh,
ka,
pero-
suspect eh. Yan ang problema ngayon.
Totoo yun. Di ba?
Madami
Tama
yung
ka dyan.
suspect.
Oo.
And also,
Pwede ka
Congressman,
mapatay, pero that is not included in this particular
Ah, syempre hindi sasama yan.
Yeah.
Kaya lang,
Yeah.
yan ang problema nga.
That's my point. Ang point ko kasi dito, legal presumption, kaya nga legal presumptions, these are disputable presumptions that we can use in order for us to run after the big personality behind the drug syndicate,
Yes, but-
including the protectors and handlers. Diba now, it is now, assuming the same example I used earlier, ask Ipidea to release Pedro, who was caught with Shabu. Diba? All it needs, kasi kailangan muna merong elements to be proven first. Ito yung proven facts before a presumption will take place or before it gives rise to another presumption. There are elements that has to be proven first. Number one doon, kailangan maaresto ka. Halimbawa, yun nga yung sinasabi ko rin dun sa...
Di ba ho ba madaling maaresto kahit sino?
Naging ano ka, naging seller ka because
yeah, Congressman,
of shabu found in your possession is large enough, more than the normal human consumption. So you are now then presumed.
yeah,
to be a seller.
Congressman, we're running out of time. In fact, I think we're way over time. But when you say, huli na lang, when you say that you do not interpret it that way, I presume you're talking about the justice system, di ba? That the justice system will not interpret it that way, di ba? But what we're saying is, I can put my faith in the Supreme Court, but I'll probably see the Supreme Court 20 years from now, if ever I even get that chance. In the meantime, my concern is not how the Supreme Court will interpret it, it's how the police will interpret it. Because the truth is, with that law, kung may batas na yan, bukas na bukas, the police will be interpreting it the way they want. And the Department of Justice has said just last week that the police have been interpreting their own procedures and protocols wrong. And therefore, they will interpret this wrong, regardless of how the Supreme Court will interpret my case 20 years from now.
Okay, if they interpret it the way they want to interpret it, they have already violated the law.
Oh, that's their problem. But in the meantime, nakakulong ako.
Number two, if no, hindi ka naman makukulong kung wala kang unlawful act na ginawa o wala kang violation Just by mere presumptions, they cannot put you to jail.
They will. The police do that. You should know that. That's precisely what the Department of Justice said. In more than 50% of the drug cases, the police did precisely that.
In this particular proposal, they cannot just put you to jail just by mere presumption.
Ay.
I'm sorry to say this, but
What's the process? What's the process?
you have to read the law.
Pag na-presume ka na involved, what's the process? What will happen to you kung hindi ka ikukulong?
Pinapatay.
Again.
If you are already presumed to be involved in the drug trade, so what will happen to you kung hindi ka ikukulong? So, yun kaya nga,
Yun nga sinasabi, i-arresto ka.
difficult to accept na hindi ka makukulong kung presumed to be involved ka just by your mere presence.
Hindi nga, because you have committed an unlawful act. That's why you are...
By being present,
No, but just being present, how can you be? How can you not motivate just because you're there?
Look, listen, meron ngang transaction doon Di ba? And right beside it, there was an illegal drug transaction. Are you telling me that we cannot presume that the guy beside the guy selling the drug is not presumed to have been involved?
but the example, in my district,
Yung wording nga, sir.
in my district, there was a drug bust
Malayo yun
in
sa katotohanan Kasi malayo sa katotohanan yung example mo. Because anybody who is...
No, hindi malayo ka totohanan kasi it happened in my district.
Tell you what, let's have another full episode for this. I think
Anybody involved in the drug transaction must probably be seated all together.
Yan lang nga,
Okay.
yan lang nga. Oo.
Well,
Or maybe not.
Or maybe, okay. Maybe not.
If they're smart, they probably won't be
Mahina-hina
seated
naman,
together.
mahina-hina naman yung mastermind kung kainuman niya yung pusher niya.
Ayun, sabi niya, she is presumed. Diba? Yun na yun
okay. Well, Congressman, I'm afraid we are really out of time.
We will see you both
gone over
tomorrow.
time.
We look forward to it.
Again,
Dapat isang
I think we need
episode
an
to.
entire episode for this discussion. Pero maraming salamat po for joining us tonight.
Para
Thank you po.
matutunan ni kung ano yung totoo, ano yung sinasabi natin dito.
Okay, Congressman Robert Ace Barbers and Congressman
Salamat po.
Rufy Biazon,
Thank
maraming
you,
salamat po for joining us tonight.
Congressman. Salamat po.
Thank you.
That'll be all for this long edition of the Chiefs. We hope what you discuss, you will keep the conversation going. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Mami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.